You mentioned K-12 higher ed workforce and transitioning to a data-centric model, and that's exactly what the founders of our next 4 companies are doing on this next panel. It's tempting to think that Indian EdTech is all about selling domestic K-12 online courses. However, the fastest growing mid-stage startups are all pursuing alternative creative strategies. In this panel, my colleague Mush Bhawani will work with these entrepreneurs to unpack innovations with the next wave of leaders in the Indian EdTech ecosystem. So with that, allow me to introduce Ankit Gupta, the CEO and co-founder of Quizzes, Anshuman Singh, the co-founder of Scalar, Mukul Rustagi, the CEO and co-founder of ClassPlus, and Ashish Munjal, the co-founder and CEO of Sunstone. Guys, come on up.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just to get started, I would love for each of our panelists to introduce themselves, tell us about what they're building, and also if they could just tell us something, a personal fact about themselves that people in the audience wouldn't know.
Yeah, my name is Anshuman. I'm the co-founder of Scalar, where we are trying to build the online Stanford. We currently enroll about 30,000 people a year, try to make them very capable software engineers or data scientists. And we pride ourselves on the outcome. So as of today, an average graduate at Scalar earns 2.3 times more than what they were earning prior to the program. Interesting fact about me, I myself have been an engineer. I was one of the persons who led the team that built Facebook Messenger. So in case you have used Facebook Messenger, then you're running a lot of my code.
Hi, I'm Ashish. I run a company named Sunstone. We primarily operate in the higher education space in the middle sort of a tier. And we work with colleges, take over the entire program in these colleges. We run 5 programs, BBA, BCA, MBA, BTech. And primarily the focus is to ensure student outcomes. So that's what has been our sort of something that we have done well. More than 90% of the graduating students from Sunstone have been able to generate employment vis-a-vis the number in similar colleges is close to 35–40%. We have around 6,000 odd students currently enrolled with us. And interesting fact about me is that I am an accidental entrepreneur. I never wanted to be a founder, and I used to make fun of people that why do you take so much pain and effort to like you can work in a company and be successful. So I call myself an accidental entrepreneur.
Hey everyone, this is Ankit. I am the co-founder and CEO of a company called Quizzes. And at Quizzes, we empower the educators to really help them with the tools so that they can keep their students excited and motivated towards learning. Our journey started more from the classrooms in the US, and today we serve around 80% of the schools in the US, and worldwide we touch like over 60 million plus monthly active learners and educators. My personal journey, I would say, I run a lot, but I have never participated in an official race, so that's still pending.
Hi, I'm Mukul. Bhaswat, my co-founder, and I are building something called ClassPlus. It's a very anti-consumer thesis to what's being built in India right now. Our thesis is that educators and content creators are not just supply but distributions for themselves. And what we are doing is we are giving them a tech product where they can list their online courses and sell to their student base directly. So essentially anybody who has a social media following or a fan base, they can essentially monetize their audiences by connecting with them directly. So in a very nutshell, like we are essentially converting educators and creators into D2C brands of their unbranded content. And we've been doing that for the last 5 years now. Predominantly, more than 15–20,000 paying creators to us who essentially have served, which is a mind-boggling number. They've served more than 50 million students till date, and like probably a lot of them We feel the happiest when an educator or a creator quits his day job at a coaching center and starts on his own. Like that's what gives us the kick. So yeah, that's what we do. Fun fact about ourselves. I have a great co-founder. I think that's the best fun fact about ourselves.
So the first topic I think it would be interesting for everyone to hear about is technology inside education technology. So Ankit, I'd love to start with you. You know, you, before it was cool, certainly in Indian EdTech, we're building a product-led growth strategy. You know, you've built for the world, really for the United States. Just how did you think about that? You know, why were you doing that 5 years ago? Would love to start there.
Yeah, so I would say when both me and Deepak started quizzes, as you said, you know, EdTech was not cool. We started with this core hypothesis that when we were kids, it was so hard for us to really focus. And the thesis was that when we were kids, it was hard. Imagine a world today when everyone is 24/7 connected to internet, how hard it would be for anyone to learn. I think that problem statement resulted in certain solutions where, you know, we came up with quizzes. And when we launched it, I would say the internet happened to be more outside India. And US was, I would say, ripe at that point where educators had received the infrastructure. However, there were like really tools which were missing for them to leverage that infra. And I'd say we ended up kind of being in that point of time where the US market was more ripe. So I'd say we probably built for the problem and then, you know, market followed us.
Do you feel like that approach would now work in India?
I would say for, I mean, it's my personal read, but if there's an unsolved problem, you know, in this day and age, if you have the internet as a distribution model, if you are able to find an unsolved problem, you'll be able to find, you know, your customers. So if you try to solve a already solved problem, probably the approach might not work.
Mukul, you know, ClassPlus, of course, started as solving this very clear technology gap in the Indian education, especially the coaching center scene. Do you feel like that's evolved?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, no jibes at anybody, but 5 years back, like think of our typical user. Our typical user would be a middle-aged guy, 45-year-old, running a coaching center in a small locality, running offline coaching for the last 10-15 years. He had no reason to use technology in any of his life, right? In fact, when we started back in 2018, like if we would typically ask somebody like this to essentially send their location on WhatsApp, they would essentially type their address and send to us. Like that is how averse to tech this audience was. And like there's a fun fact that in our seed round, we got rejected by 162 VCs. Like I still have that count embodied in myself. And their concerns were very fine. They were saying that how will middle-aged teachers essentially use technology? Why will they essentially pay for it? You want to go into tier 2, tier 3 India. Like how will this really happen? And fast forward that to 2022, like probably the amount of content these teachers produce, the amount of growth their own distribution channels on, let's say something like a Facebook, WhatsApp, YouTube, or a Telegram grows. If you look at the editing qualities of what they put up, like the SEO growth that they crack on digital platforms, it would, I'm not kidding, it would put a lot of talent in tech startups to shame. And these guys have essentially built their own mini edtech businesses that are massively profitable. And that has solely been on the back of technology on how they record content and how they distribute it. And I think that has been a biggest, like especially in terms of video editing tools, I think probably these people are probably the top 1% of the country. So like over the last 5 years, this has come a very, very long way.
Anshuman, you know, while you offer courses at Scalar, you know, you and Abhiman, you're probably some of the most technical founders in education technology in India. What's the role of technology in a company that, you know, is not selling a subscription or a SaaS product?
I mean, for us, the success metric is the outcome that happens with an individual. And that means that there has to be a large delta in their learning. So it then becomes a game of engagement. When is the user dropping off? How much time are they spending on the platform? What are they doing during the time? Can you actually create real-life simulations where you can simulate the kind of work they would do at a job so that you know beforehand where they make mistakes and hence you go and correct them. All of these are actually very deeply technical, especially if I have to simulate software engineering jobs. So imagine what Google does on a day-to-day basis, and if I'm creating a mini simulation of that, that is very technical. So if you look at us as a course, sure, we don't need tech. But if you look at us as engines that take you from point A to point B very reliably, 99% of the time, and crack engagement at such a large scale for 12 months of time, then, I mean, it needs to be very technical because it's humanly impossible to crack that engagement otherwise.
And you, of course, are delivering online programs. Do you have a view on whether those are more effective or less effective than offline? And then, we should have Ashish chime in doing purely offline programs.
I wouldn't compare online and offline. I mean, it's about how both are done. So offline programs not done very well are ineffective, and very similarly, online programs also not done well are very, very ineffective. So online programs can be equally effective as offline programs as long as they're built the right way. Most online education companies, as of today, they don't have the right kind of rigor and focus on the engagement of every single person in the cohort. If that is solved, then online is as effective as offline. In fact, it's more enriching because if I'm attending a class, every single person has the front seat to the class. In a physical environment, it's impossible to make that happen.
Is it impossible, Ashish?
So the way we look at formal education is at sort of three parts: credentialing, academic / let's say outcomes, and then campus life. So credentialing, obviously, you can't do much with technology, but when it comes to campus life, academics, and the outcomes, this is where the tech can play a huge role, irrespective whether the student is online or offline. It's the tech in the learning, tech in the campus life, which needs to be sort of worked on. As Anshuman said, it's the simulation, it's student outcomes tracking. So in our case, one thing is the data point that we generate on every student is actually something that no other offline college could do, because we are tracking each and every action that he's taking. Although he might be studying offline, but everything that he's doing is within the Sunstone app. His every class, every assignment, everything is in the Sunstone app. And that is what we feel is the critical part, because I am able to create that learning journey of every single student within Sunstone, although he may be physically studying in any college. So that's what I personally would want to see, the next wave of technology in education, where we as an education founders start putting a lot of tech in the learning side of things, because ultimately we have to ensure that it's like thousands and lakhs of students which are studying on our portals or our platform. It's every single student outcome that matters. And that is something which you can't achieve without putting tech in education.
Mukul ClassPlus is, of course, a very hybrid platform where the use case is both online and offline. What have you seen? I know we've talked a lot about the data changing post-lockdown, pre-lockdown. What's happening on the ground in India?
I think this eternal debate of online and offline, I think we have a view on that. We think that chaos happens when, so there are two kinds of audiences in the country in terms of learner base. One who need online and one who need offline. Chaos essentially starts happening when you start selling online to the people who need offline, and you start selling offline to the people who need online. And I'll give you an example. For example, in offline tutoring, apart from education being at the core of it, there are some other purposes that it solves. So right from socializing to discipline to peer learning, that is one aspect that only offline can solve, right? Similarly, there's an advantage of online, which is essentially portability, cost effectiveness, which they solve. Now, two very different categories would be like, let's say, K-12 versus higher ed learning, right? Now, if you start selling online to K-12, which is essentially where they need actually essentially discipline and socializing, it will result into an chaos. Similarly, if you start selling the higher ed people who are sorted on those fronts, but they need the cost advantage and portability, if you start pushing offline to them, then it will be a problem. So I don't think it's an online versus offline thing. I think there are multiple personas of learners out there, and depending on those personas, you essentially push out a solution to them. And I think that is where small businesses, small medium businesses, private coaching institutes or YouTubers, they're extremely good at. They know what their audiences are, what they need, and that is why they it's very rare to see them muffle on these choices, and that's why they succeed.
I just have a point to add there. One point which I disagree on is that the people post K-12, they don't need community and peer learning. They still need community and peer learning, to be very honest. However, the one difference in that segment is that for them, the opportunity cost is much higher to do a purely physical program, because the moment they leave their job, they're giving up the kind of salary they could have made. So hence, doing something with their job makes a lot more sense. And to be honest, like it is some or the other gap that you're filling all through your life. In the case of K-12, it is always full-time, you're focused on offline education. Hence, the battle for post-K-12 education is how do you crack community and peer learning, either in a hybrid setup where you get them to meet very often, or in an online setup where, let's say, they're interacting heavily on WhatsApp or Slack, wherever it is possible. But they do need community.
Agreed. I was just mentioning out the weightages of each.
So, on our panel, we have actually the pre-K to gray spectrum, right? We have Ankit focused on K-12. We have Mukul with the main use cases, test prep. We have Ashish where it's proper higher education, and then Scalar being really workforce learning. A big question that we've been talking about this whole event, and sort of the main question we're always asking, and we were talking about outcomes, is what are the outcomes, right? In test prep, there's 100 million aspirants in India and maybe 1,000 seats for them. Where are the jobs? Of course, Scalar is on one spectrum, really catering to the best engineers. Where's the next space for you guys to create outcomes for India?
I mean, for us, it is jobs, and I don't believe that there is an end to jobs. It's not a zero-sum game. If you produce very capable engineers, they'll go and start the company of their own that creates more jobs. So as long as there are problems to be solved in the world, tech is an enabler to solve that problem. And every single attempt at solving a problem creates more jobs, and hence there is an infinite spectrum of the number of jobs or number of outcomes of jobs you can cater to. I understand that K-12 is, the test prep space is limited, but then I am not an expert there.
I'll completely agree with Anshuman. So K-12 and test prep may be a slightly different market because there are X number of seats which are available and Y number of colleges. But in case of higher education, the government focus is also increasing on gross enrollment ratio. And ultimately, when you have more employable graduates graduating every year, they generate more number of jobs every year. Whether the jobs come from, let's say, developed markets or the entrepreneurs here or the large companies who are earlier not been able to hire, or they takes longer time to hire, that cycle time is reduced. But I completely agree with that. It's not a zero-sum game. So if you can ensure that the graduates are employable, they can get to jobs much faster. For the larger companies like Infosys and all those banks, if the speed to revenue is much quicker because of the better graduates graduating every year, it's overall add to the economic cycle of the country.
Maybe if I add, at least in K-12, I feel those are very formative years for students to build the skills. And in this changing environment, right, like where the learning happens from pre-K to gray, I think the most fundamental skill sets are like how even you learn. And in K-12, the learning outcomes, in my understanding, just helps, given the, I'd say the shortage both on the technology as on the people side, it helps the folks to identify which are the students who need different kind of help, maybe, differentiate them in a certain group. I think in K-12 at least, again, not a zero-sum game, but maybe it's more the idea where how do you find a similar set of students where you can find that educator who can then serve their need. So even I would say in K-12 it ends up being not a zero-sum. And maybe test prep, Mukul, if you want to share.
Can you come again on this one, Mustafa?
Sorry?
Can you repeat the question on this one again?
We're basically talking about what happens with outcomes in your segment. And of course, test prep is maybe the most contentious in that aspect because you have 100 million aspirants going for, sub 1% possible placements.
Yeah. To be honest, and although we are not a test prep company, we are a horizontal B2B SaaS for any kind of creator. But a majority customers do come from this entire coaching and test prep thing. And I think it's a very, very tangible. So I don't even know if most of the students really care for learning outcomes there or not. Everybody wants to clear an examination, which either increases their probability of getting a job or enter into a college which can get them a higher job. So it's like, I think most of test prep in India is actually indirectly aimed at employability. And the only thing that we have seen on the ground caring about is actually essentially clearing the exams. Good or bad, I don't know, but that's how it is.
Actually, I'll just add one thing there. For India specifically, where the school education is not that great, test prep is actually a very effective way of getting high quality learning from high quality instructors. Your schools don't have good teachers, but test prep segment has very good teachers. I learned most of my physics, chemistry, maths from that segment than I did in schools.
I'd love to use that as a transition into your own learnings as founders, especially in the COVID years and now the sort of post-COVID new normal. What have you all learned as you've really all scaled your companies massively in the last 3 years?
I can begin, right? Like pre-COVID, we were a very lean team. So we were like less than 20 folks, but we had like really a good scale. We were still in the early phases before monetizing. I think one phase for us as a company was like, how do you build capacity? So we expanded our team, and then as a company, I think for us, it was a learning journey where how can you still operate with this idea around decentralization where individuals have full autonomy, but then, also you can have a more larger team so that you can reach out and, solve multiple problems at the same time. So I think for us, that was one of the learning, just more on the operation, I'd say on the operating style as a company.
Yeah, at least for us, I don't know whether we would have existed without COVID. COVID happened and that accelerated the journey because, it increased the perception of online education as a way of learning. And that gave us the opportunity to create the kind of outcomes that we could. And that has accelerated our journey to a major extent. Now, that behavior doesn't go back. Now, if you know that you have friends who have been through the same program, they've had great outcomes, there is just more acceptance of the program. Without COVID, probably the entire journey would have taken a few more years to get to where it is right now.
Yeah, so I was just adding that for us, because we operate in a formal education space, so we didn't see a huge uplift in numbers of enrollment, or we didn't see a huge dip in a post-COVID world. But one thing which COVID has led to, which is sort of a really a welcome change on two fronts. One is that hybrid education within the physical premises of college is now acceptable to the students and both colleges, which is a big change, because since 2018-19, when we were trying to push a lot of hybrid learning in the college, we were facing a lot of resistance, both from the college authorities and the students. So in a post-COVID world in 2022-23, that is something which is gaining a lot of acceptability in the college. Second thing, which is actually a much bigger and a fundamental shift, is the campus placements. in a pre-COVID world, a lot of companies used to go and visit the campus, even in the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 segment, when they are hiring in large numbers. And that is the reason a lot of students from tier 3 towns used to come and study in large cities like Bangalore, Bombay, Delhi, Gurgaon, and all of this. Because if you are in larger cities, your probability of getting into an employment becomes multifold. That is something which has completely shifted in a post-COVID world. What we are seeing is that more than 80% of our employers don't want to physically visit a campus for campus hiring. That has led to what is that a student who is sitting in Guwahati or a Mysore or let's say a Patiala have equal opportunities for getting into a job as a student who is now studying in Bangalore or Bombay. So this is something which we are also seeing a great change on the campus placement side of things, which gives an equal opportunity to the students in a tier 3 city or a tier 1 sort of a city.
I think it's a very obvious thing, but I think COVID was the greatest advertising campaign that could have existed for EdTech. Like the market actually accelerated by at least half a decade from at least the lens we saw it. And what was interesting was not the first wave. Like obviously the first wave essentially led a lot of educators and coaching institutes to come online and like start giving out lessons to their kids who were remote. And I'll tell you a fun fact about this. We essentially thought when we started that Class Plus would be a metro phenomena because we are essentially banking on teachers who would use technology. Post-COVID wave 1, we pulled out the data and we saw that 78% of our teacher base was essentially coming from Tier 2 and Tier 3 India. 48% from Tier 2, 30% from Tier 3. And by the way, Tier 3 looks very different to what we even expect. Like, only people who have been to Tier 3 India do really know what that meant. So I think that was first wave, like how quickly and how deep could technology penetrate when it was the only way to essentially survive. I think that was the smaller uptake. The second like unexpected behavior that we saw was in the second wave of COVID, when essentially a lot of people started building their non-academic teaching businesses online. So there was a host of creators who started monetizing their stock market channels, their photography channels, their spoken English channels, their personality coaching channels. We've had creators on our platform who have been teaching weird stuff, right from somebody teaching magic to somebody teaching dating. And yes, they make a lot of money, right? And I think that as a behavior, I am telling you, like, even all things aside, even we couldn't have predicted that half a decade back. So I think that sheer confidence where people said that we can build our own digital businesses, we can set up our own coaching channels, and we can monetize our audiences by teaching whatsoever possible. I think that was a gift that the COVID gave to this country, which can never be taken back away.
So COVID, of course, was very beneficial to all of you, but you all have also done very well post-COVID in 2022, and all your businesses have been growing, whereas the public perception of EdTech has done the inverse, right? And there's, especially in India, a lot of negative press and constant articles about what's going on. Does that affect you all? Does that affect team morale? How do you deal with that as founders?
I'm always the first one to go, so I'll go again. I'm not sure whether we should call ourselves EdTech or JobTech. So our narrative has been, look, we're not EdTech. We are JobTech, and hence, like, whatever is happening is not happening for our segment. In general, however, if you also filter down the negative press, the negative press is not about the upskilling space or spaces which are leading to better job outcomes. They're for the other spaces. So, I mean, what you said has lesser effect on us, at least at this moment, as compared to the other segment.
Yeah, I might just resonate, like, I think especially when we are hiring the new folks, the positioning is definitely, there is a bit of apprehension from the candidates on joining an EdTech company. And we also end up saying, like, hey, we are in technology. We are a technology project which ends up being in education. So I think that press maybe has had some impact on, for the folks who want to come into this space. There's been a bit of extra work which is required. However, just as a company, as you said, right, like, we were not, we were being used in the classrooms and before COVID, and then when COVID happened, the learning started moving more digital, but then was a space for learning both, or I'd say digital products, both pre-COVID and post-COVID, so yeah.
So, I would just say that during COVID times, obviously there was big paradigm shift in the way education was perceived, EdTech companies was perceived, and in a post-COVID world, obviously there has to be some corrections. Luckily for some of us, we are not part of that group, and the business is growing well and everything. And I think this is also a time wherein there is some sanity which is also setting in. You can hire the right talent and good people, and obviously you can focus on building your business less on a sort of focusing on performance marketing more organically. So it's a good time, it's a slightly stable time, so you can also focus on building the business. So that's what I would take from it.
I think what a lot of people essentially, and especially since you said that about the stuff that we read online, how does that affect you, right? I think what we forget is that there is a difference between a slower growth and a negative growth. It's a common assumption that if something grew at 5x for 2 years, and if it grows 3x the third year, they're essentially degrowing. No, they're not degrowing. Mathematically, they're still growing, but at a slower rate, right? And I think that's the exact case with adoption of online learning or whatever else you want to put that word to it. To be honest, like all of us in India have seen that phenomenon, not just in education, but 5 to actually 7 years back, there happened a phenomenon in India called demonetization, right? And for the next 6 months, everybody was using wallets, and then this normalcy came, and people started using cash, right? But, and it was the same amount, it was the same monologue that started coming that, like, hey, wallets are going out of fashion, right? I'm telling you, the country wouldn't have survived if there were no wallets in COVID, right? And today, if you look at it, probably more digital transactions happen here than anywhere else. The point is that even if you grow at a slower growth, but if you grow consistently over a long period of time, let's say 5 to 7 years, in businesses which are reliant on infrastructure, when they grow 5 to 7 years, they compound to such a massive state that life without them can't be possible. And I think that is what's happening with, at least from, and more importantly, the data that we are seeing from learners, the data we have seen from the ground, and I think all the 3 other businesses on this panel would also agree, that has been massively encouraging. So that is where we drive the comfort from. Yes, there's a little bit of talent who's now jittery on joining EdTech, but that essentially helps us filtrate who really means it and who really says it, right? So that's also a good thing for EdTech companies, to be honest.
Just to add to what he said, like one other proof that the public perception is not as bad as it is portrayed in the media is the fact that governments today are more accepting of online degrees. There is more push to get to online degrees than it was probably like 3-4 years back. The top institutions like BITS Pilani, they are creating online degree programs which have the same kind of recognition as let's say, a physical degree program. Those things were not imaginable probably 4 years back. So in general, the perception is getting better. It's just not getting better at the same pace.
I think the perception is actually whatever we see, the bad or whatever, is in the startup ecosystem. The general larger masses, there is no love lost.
So we have just a few minutes left. I would love for just to go through each of you with some closing remarks. Would love for you to share what's something you're excited about, what's next for Scalar, what's next for Sunstone. You all have reinvented your companies in some ways in COVID and really re-innovated, and would love for you to share that with the group.
Yeah, for us, I mean, we exist because the current conventional universities don't do their job. And our long-term view is that we want to replace universities. We are, in fact, launching a bachelor's this year. We do foresee a world where people wouldn't go to conventional universities. Degrees would matter much less and less. It is not going to happen in the short term, I understand. But long term, I am very hopeful that the world is going to start indexing more on skills and what you can do rather than just degrees. And that's what we are betting on. We want to replace universities. That's what we'll be working on.
So I would say the same. Obviously, the skills matter much more than degrees, but there is a need for credentialing. Now, whether that need would be there for next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, doesn't matter. But there is definitely a need of the offline element in education because that serves a larger purpose of my peer group, my network, my campus life. My overall growth as a person happens in a physical environment which is outside of my home. So we continue to back on that, and obviously the segment that we are going after, and the programs that we have, it's a massive market. There are more than 10 million plus enrollment that happen in our country every year, and like even the universities, whatever we guys doing together, we still probably all of us are still scratching the surface. The market is really large.
Yeah, so at Quizzes, our mission started with, motivating each and every student. As, we continue to go deep into this problem, for us, the idea is like, we want to take Quizzes and really motivate each and every learner, irrespective of their language, location, or learning environment. And in that path, we're just getting started. So a few things which I find really exciting, and especially this new evolution of technology, where first time probably there would be an opportunity where we can really personalize and differentiate learning for each and every individual student, and we want to play like an important part in that. So from that standpoint, like really excited for the coming years.
I think we have a fun and philosophical answer to that. India was known to have, really long back, it was known to have a golden age of educators, which I think we lost somewhere in the middle because essentially educators or creators couldn't achieve financial independence, or they couldn't really make large financial gains out of running their coaching. And I think that is where we are seeing a lot of changes happening. Essentially over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, like however long we live, we'll see a lot of people actually choose teaching and educating as their full-time profession because they can also make the desired financial outcomes from it. And it's not just about academic teaching. Probably somebody would start up teaching investing, to journalism, to marketing, to coding, to drawing, to dancing, to probably whatever you can imagine, right? And I think that in itself is a great pleasure and a joy while building Class Plus, because essentially helping these educators and content creators to essentially take the plunge and set up their online coaching business or their EdTech business, as they can call it. And if we as a platform can help in fulfilling not just our wish list, but a lot of these aspiring entrepreneurs' wish list, I think that's a job well done when we look back at it 20, 25 years down the line. So I think that's what excites us.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Perfect. Right on time. As a callback for those of you that were in the room during Deborah's conversation with Sandeep, he mentioned that there are going to be a number of public EdTech companies here over the next couple of years, and hopefully we see a handful coming from that group as well.